Welcome everyone. Today we're going to paint this peaceful crimson forest. And today I'm using a Frederick 16 by 20 inch gallery wrapped canvas, but this will work on any size canvas you like. And I'm going to start with my 1 inch flat brush, wet it in my jar and wipe it off a bit on the edge. And then I'm going to mix some black and some white, very simple, just into kind of a medium gray. Don't go too dark, but make sure that it's definitely gray. And it doesn't really matter if the color is exactly the same every time you go back to pick up more paint. Just cover the background with those sweeping kind of back and forth X's, just focusing on covering all of the white speckles of the canvas. Don't worry about brush stroke marks or any of that because it's all going to be masked once we're done. If you feel like you have a hard time blending paint, when you're painting a background like this is a good time to practice that. So even though it's not required to have a perfectly smooth, even background, it's just a good place to, practice a few other techniques. And see how I don't worry about getting the exact same color when I go back. That's one of the reasons I like to mix my color as I go, is so that I don't get the exact same color. I feel like it just keeps things a little bit more interesting, a little more dynamic, rather than just being flat and, a solid color. Get a little extra water on your brush whenever you feel like the paint's kind of dragging and just not covering the way it needs to. Remember that you use heavy pressure to lay paint down, but come up onto the tip of the brush and use a softer pressure to smooth away lines and to blend. All right, once we're done with that, I'm going to get my blow dryer and make sure that's completely dry. And now I'm going to use the same brush. I'm just picking up a little bit of white, not loading my brush, and I'm going to pick up some matte medium. And basically I'm going to be glazing a transparent version of this titanium white over a section of my canvas, just to make it look like there's an area where the sun is kind of peeking through the forest. My brush was a little too wet, so I'm just kind of touching the bristles down by the ferrule to my towel. Just sucks out a little bit of moisture without taking too much paint out of my brush. Now, when you glaze like this, very transparent, you are going to get a lot of brush stroke marks, but I'm really not terribly concerned with it. Primarily because I'm going to do a couple of layers, and all of those brush stroke marks layered together are going to help create a very misty, smoky effect. Here I'm just picking up matte medium. I only picked up white at the very beginning. From there on out, it's just matte medium to get those colors to fade outward. You want to make sure that layer is completely dry and do another layer if you feel like you need it. I actually do 3 layers. So here just a bit of white, not a ton, and a good amount of matte medium. And every time you add a layer, it's just going to deepen that color and intensify the texture. But if you get the exact look that you want in a single layer, that's perfectly fine too. You don't have to do 3 layers. Or if it takes you 5 layers to do it, that's okay too. So you're just picking up matte medium. Because I don't want hard edges in that misty white. Hard edges are going to take away the look of glowing fog, which is kind of what I want. I'm going to dry it one more time and do one more quick layer, and then we're done with the light in the background. All right, now that that's dry, I'm gonna go to my 1/2 inch angle and I'm gonna mix up a gray color that's about the color that I put on the background in the first place. It can be a little off. Basically, I just barely wanna be able to see it there. And I'm just gonna sketch out where I want the horizon. It's about 1/3 of the way up from the bottom of the canvas, but it doesn't have to be precise. Over on the left, I want that to just kind of fade into the background. So I am going a little bit darker and then just kind of scumbling it so there's not a hard line there. I originally got the idea for this painting from this stock image that I downloaded. I didn't like that the tree was being covered up by these other trees, and I wanted to come up with a way to make my red tree painting stand out a little bit, because I know, there's a million red tree paintings in a black and white forest out there. So since we had been doing palette knife work for most of this month, I decided let's go ahead and do the foliage with palette knife and see how that turns out. All right, back to my angle brush and getting a light gray color. This gray color, I just want to be able to stand out in the lightest area of my background, so it's pretty light. I'm going to start by drawing a narrow tree trunk, and I'm going to stop this line at the horizon. Widen it out a little bit. By stopping that tree at the horizon and making it very, very pale, that pushes it back into the distance. All right, I'm gonna mix up a color that's just a little bit darker, not substantially darker, just barely. And I'm going to do another tree trunk over here. It's going to be a little bit wider, and I'm going to bring it down over the edge of the horizon just a little bit. So the combination of it being below the horizon, wider and darker, is going to pull it forward toward us a little bit more. And we're going to go a little bit darker still. It's still pretty light, but it's a bit darker. And this one, we're going to make wider, and I'm going to bring it even farther below the edge of the horizon. And this is going to pull this tree the closest to us out of these three. And if you're more comfortable using a different brush, you don't have to use an angle brush. I really like getting the crisp lines that I can get with an angle brush, so that's why I like to use that one. But whatever you're comfortable with, a round brush, a flat brush, anything. A little darker still, and I'm going to test that. I just want it to be barely darker than that color over there. I'm going to put one more tree, and I brought this one down about as low below the horizon as that third tree on the right, but it didn't end up really mattering because the bulk of it got covered up, especially at the bottom. But I like being able to have that peek out around the trees that I put in the foreground because it just adds a little extra distance. Now coming up here, I painted the ground and then realized that my camera hadn't recorded any of it, so I painted over it real quick and then redid it, so that's why my ground magically looks different. I'm going to use my fan brush, wet it in my jar, wipe it on the edge, and then I'm just going to touch it to my towel. I'm going to mix up a gray color, pretty light, and I'm just going to kind of start scumbling out some grasses. I'm not being precise. I'm scrubbing my fan brush. I'm daubing it. I'm just finding the different looks that my fan brush can do. Don't get overly stiff with your fan brush and do the same mark time after time. That's how you get those really phony looking things with your fan brush. See, I stabbed it on my palette to break up the bristles a little bit. And I'll do a couple of brush strokes one way, and then I'll change how I'm holding my fan brush or using my fan brush and do something completely different. Just creating some texture. I'm trying to keep it a little bit lighter to the back, and then I'm going to get darker toward the front, the bottom of the canvas. But I'm not worrying about detail in my grasses just yet. It's just all about building that base layer of color, lighter in the back, darker in the front, and creating a little bit of texture. If your lines from your fan brush start getting really fuzzy, either get a little matte medium like I'm doing or just a little extra water. The matte medium for the rest of the painting is not required. I would say for the glazing part in the background, you definitely want to use matte medium or gloss medium. But for the rest of the painting, I'm just using it because I like to. My paint is a little darker now as I start to move downward. And see how I'm putting full contact pressure on that fan brush. I'm really just like mashing it to the canvas. I think that's the number one thing that I see people do when they use a fan brush when they're not confident with it, is they're very gentle with it. They just like touch the brush to the canvas, and that gives you those very stiff, weird eyelash type looks. But if you get in there and you're not afraid of the fan brush and you just, you know, put that brush to work, I feel like everything ends up looking just a little more natural and a little more confident. Just getting a hint of that dark color toward the back. Now we're going to go almost black. There's still a little bit of white in there, so it's still a little on the gray side. And I'm really going to darken up these corners. All right, onto my number 10 round brush. It's got a little extra water in it, and I'm just loading up with black paint, and we're gonna start making the tree trunk. So just decide how high up you want the tree branches to go, the main branches, and then start there and bring it down into the ground. I like to keep my branches a little angly because I think that's a little more interesting than just, you know, smooth and regular branches. I like to put little elbows in them. Just widen those out because most of this is going to show. So make sure these trunks look the way you want them to look. But from here on out, everything else I add to these is really just there for my purposes. So I just need to know where my foliage is going to go. The vast majority of these next branches are going to be covered up. You won't even see them. So you don't have to put a lot of time and attention into making them look wonderful. You really just want to make sure that wherever you think you want foliage, you've got some tree branches there to help give them support and remind you, put some foliage right here. So think about the shape, the overall shape that you want your tree to have. I really liked the kind of angly look in the stock image that I downloaded, but I wanted to kind of amplify that. So my focus was really on bringing it down low on the right and bringing it up nice and high on the left, and creating that interesting angle. Now I'm going to go to my number 3 just to make sure that they're not getting too fat and out of control. And I'm just refining it's still all about the shape, the overall shape that I want for the tree. This is not about me making, beautiful little tree branches. If my tree branches were going to show more than they do now, I would have put a lot more effort and energy into making these branches, very interesting and making them cross over each other and be a little bit fuller. But since that wasn't my focus, it didn't matter. Just keep standing back as you build the branches and check for balance. If it feels too heavy on one side, like it's got too many branches on one side and it feels like the tree's gonna start leaning that way, then go to the other side and add a few more. Make sure that it's taller in one area than it is in another, because that's very interesting. Now I'm taking my black chalk pencil and I'm just ever so lightly sketching around the branches to find the ultimate shape of the foliage, where I want the foliage to extend to, and kind of in what shape. I find that I like the way my foliage looks more if I kind of plan it like this. If I don't plan it like this, then I don't really know where to put everything, and it can end up just sticking straight to the branches and just looking very stiff or looking like a lollipop. So I find it's helpful to just kind of sketch out where I ultimately want everything to go. All right, back to the ground for a minute. Another little bit of a dark, dark gray, and we're gonna anchor the tree to the ground. So a good amount of this dark color, stab my fan brush to break it up, and kind of create this shadow and mound of different plants and grasses right here below the tree. A little bit lighter there to bridge the gap between the lighter color that's already on the ground and this dark color. By just taking that over that line of the dark a little bit, it kind of anchors it to the ground. A little lighter still. And we can work on adding a few little details into the grass. So what I'm doing is just kind of tapping a bit and then up. So that creates like maybe some little flowers and stems, or grasses that have gone to seed. Just something a little bit interesting. It's just a touch with the tip of the brush and then a flick up underneath it. And I'm going to kind of do that all over. I'll vary up the color. Sometimes it'll be a lot lighter and heavier, like there. And then in other places I might go to a dark paint and add some darker little flowery bits with stems. But I think it's important to keep that brush stabbed because, again, it will open up the bristles. If you're always just wiping the brush, that packs them very tightly together and creates a very orderly pattern. when you go to stab it to your canvas or wipe it on the canvas. But by stabbing the end of the brush, it breaks it up, just gives you a bit more of kind of a natural, organic look. Nice and light. Just tried to pick up some white and then stab that into the end of my canvas. I want some back here that are quite bright. I'm just changing up my color, getting a darker one. If anything was too bright, I'm just lightly flicking over top of it here, and you know, it helps anchor it down to the ground or just kicks it back in a little bit. If something ends up being too bright for you, you don't have to paint it out. Just simply taking a darker color and swiping up over it just a little bit will really, really help kind of bring it back into that space where you need it to be. It's not necessary to obliterate it. All right, I'm going to use this little 1-inch diamond head shaped palette knife, and I'm going to pick up some black paint. It's a good amount of black paint, but not a ton. And I'm going to start into the branches. Some light pressure, but I am spreading the paint thin. Now notice that I'm not taking this paint all the way to those pencil lines in most cases. It is getting a little bit fuzzy, but because I'm not taking it out as far as I ultimately want, that doesn't matter. Make sure that you're not making polka dots on your tree. You don't want this to look like a lollipop. So when you put it in one area, make sure that you kind of take it out so that it connects with another area. And definitely leave some space where you can see the background in the tree foliage. So see, no polka dots. Wipe your knife off whenever you feel like it's dragging too much paint around. A clean knife with a palette knife is gonna make work a lot easier. The messier your knife gets, the harder it is to control. And you're not looking for texture here. Like I said, spread this paint thin. As we add the highlights, it's going to naturally build texture. If you have too much texture in your tree right off the bat, then it's gonna be really hard to highlight, and it's gonna be a big globby mess by the end of it. So each layer, at least beginning, is fairly thin. And as we go, we can start adding the layers just a little bit heavier here and there. See how I haven't gone outside of my pencil lines, because the tree would just look super fuzzy if I took this all the way to how big I actually wanted it. All right, clean knife, and now I just picked up a little point on the end, and using light pressure, I'm really trying to keep just the end of the knife on the canvas. I'm taking the branches or the foliage out further, keeping little windows where I can see the sky in there, but this is just creating those kind of leafy ends. And it's helping get rid of that kind of fuzzy look. Some of that fuzzy texture is still going to show in the end, and that's fine. I just don't want the ends to be completely fuzzy. The most important thing while you're doing this part is wipe off your knife every single time you go back for more paint. So I try to show you here as often as possible, but whenever my knife leaves the canvas, I'm wiping it off before I pick up new paint. A clean knife is gonna make you much happier, I promise. Don't underestimate the value of wiping that knife off every single time you go back for paint. See, just nudging little bits so that I get some nice little leafy ends. Now I can start going out to my pencil lines or beyond. Just gonna keep that going all throughout the tree. Make sure that it's really interesting. Don't just, puff those out in all directions. Pay attention to the direction that the branches are moving. The ones up top, maybe the little ends kind of swoop up a bit. The branches that are on the bottom, see there? Maybe it kind of swoops down a little bit. Just try to think of how the tree might grow and make it interesting. Just keep refining the shape of the tree and making, bits taller or poke out further. Just keep going until the tree looks about like what you want it to look like. Remembering that as we add the color layers on top, that the shape is going to change a little bit and it may get just a little bit bigger as we add those highlight colors. Don't get impatient and stop wiping your palette knife off. Remember to wipe off your palette knife every single time you go back for more paint. Now I'm taking just a very light smear of black paint, just a small amount, and I'm going to nudge a few little areas into the base here that might look like fallen leaves or just a shadow, darker grasses, whatever it looks like to you. Just get some of that dark paint on there very, very thinly. I'm picking up just an absolutely tiny, tiny amount. I'm not leaving any texture there. All right, I'm just gonna adjust a couple little spots on the tree here. I decided I needed it a little bit higher in this area for some balance. And then I'm gonna make sure that the black layer is almost completely dry. I don't think it was perfectly dry, but you want it at least dry enough that the paint isn't gonna smear around on this next part. All right, I've now got some black and some Purell red. And you don't have to use Purell if you don't have it. You can use cadmium red deep if you like. I really liked the cool, the kind of blue base of the Purell over the cadmium red. So that's why I used it, but whichever will work perfectly fine. I mixed it with the black until it was just barely showing the red. It's very, very dark, but I can tell it's red. And I'm putting on a very thin amount again, mostly keeping it to the black, but I'm also not trying to cover all of the black, especially at the bottom, the foliage at the bottom of the tree. I'm allowing more of that black to continue showing because that's where we're going to have the most shadows. Now, even though I didn't apply the black heavily, it does have a little bit of texture because it's another layer of paint. So this Purell black mixture is kind of hitting the black part before it hits the gray of the background. So you won't have to worry too much about covering too much of the gray unless you're using a huge amount of paint. So don't use a ton, just get a bit, smear it on where you want some of that red to start existing. I'm going to mix more red into that same mixture. So it's still the black-red mixture, but it's got more red to it. Just still focusing on not creating too much texture. Let the textures start to build naturally as you layer paint on top of paint. It's going to start creating texture on its own without your help. I am just loosely mixing it on my palette there. I'm not trying to get a perfect mixture on my palette. All right, more red. Let's really start to show that red off. I did not wait for that last layer to dry because these colors are pretty close together. But notice I'm being much looser with how I apply this color. There might be ever so slightly a bit of texture in this application. I'm definitely not trying to cover everything. And I'm trying to practice the put it down, leave it alone thing. So I smear it down and I really just kind of leave it where it lies. Zoom in here for a little bit of a better shot so you can tell exactly what that texture looks like and how everything's starting to layer together. So see, that's definitely a little bit thicker than those last two layers. but it's still pretty thin. Try to connect some of these shapes. Right now I've got some individual shapes that look a little like puffball-y, but I don't leave it like that. So if you start to notice that it looks like you've got a ball, a blob, a blob, just start to connect some of them. And more red. I'm using very light pressure. I'm just barely touching, and that way the paint is just going to stick to the high points and I don't have to work so hard for it. I'm not trying to force the paint into any area. I'm just kind of touching it to the canvas and letting it be where it stays. See there, I'm trying to connect those two little blobs a bit. There's another blob in here. And I'm connecting it to that one above. Again, make sure you keep your knife wiped off. Every time you go back for more paint, wipe it off. It just helps you keep better control of your paint. See, now I'm developing some good texture, and so when I just touch with that paint on my knife, it just sticks where it's going to stick. It actually makes it quite easy to do. Back to my number 3 and some black with just a little extra water. I'm just going to touch up some of these branches. You know, wherever I see an opening, looks like maybe it needs a little structure, I'm going to put a branch in there. Maybe even take a couple of the branches just outside of the shapes. I'm not going to spend too much time with these branches though. All right, that's about all for the branches. I'm just going to take a little bit of that red color, just a very slight smear. There's no glob of paint here, and I'm just going to lightly scrape a little bit of that color into the ground here. It's just really catching the high points of the canvas. When doing this, I would rather have you pick up way less paint than you need than accidentally pick up too much paint, because it's easier to get more paint and amp it up, but if you get too much paint and, you know, get big blobs of it in the first place, it's going to be really hard to get rid of. So let me show you. See, it's just a smear. There's no globs of paint there. That's almost no paint. And then it's a very light touch. Down to my 1/4 inch angle brush, some black, and I've got a tiny bit of white here. I'm just going to start making some highlights on the tree trunks. Just however you want. I'm just kind of slashing this gray on, and then I'll get some black and, you know, kind of go back and forth. Make some little highlight areas, kick some back with some black. I think building the highlights and the shadows slowly makes it more effective. A little bit more white. I liked the idea that my trees looked a little bit twisty. But that's really going to depend on the shape of your tree trunks in the first place. Go with what feels natural or what you feel comfortable doing. And if you don't feel comfortable doing highlights on your tree trunks, that's fine too. You can leave them black. You can do anything you want. Just doing the exact same thing over here. Little gray, back to black. A little brighter of a gray-white color, a little more black, just until I'm satisfied. Long liner. It's got a little extra water on it, and I'm going to get some black. And I'm just going to create some little whimsical grasses here. If you're not comfortable using a long liner like this to flick out little grasses, then don't do it. You can skip it. Or if you're confident using your fan brush, you can do that too. I'm also making just little spots at the top of some of them, just kind of dabbing with the long liner to create some little, you know, seed heads or flowers or buds or whatever. Now I've cleaned off my long liner, got a little extra water on it, and I'm getting some of my red. And I'm going to do the same thing with some of those little flower tops. I'm just going to pop a couple of those little polka dotty bits on there. It's a very subtle effect. Back to my knife, I've got a little bit of cadmium red light. Because the Purell red is a little bit dark, I want a color that's going to highlight it, but I didn't want it to turn pink. So a little bit of this cad red light mixed with the Purell, and that gave me a nice bright highlight color. And the color in the tree already is about dry. I think it was a tiny bit wet, but it was mostly dry to the touch. And I'm barely touching with this highlight color So it's just catching the high point, and I'm really getting some texture out of it, which is a lot of fun at this point. I'm going to take a little bit of this Purell Cad Red Light mixture and just swipe a tiny bit into the ground here. Almost put too much there. And just a little bit of the Purell by itself to knock back any of those areas that I felt like were too intense with the Cad Red Light. And then we're done with our tree. All right, to my 1/2 inch flat, and I'm just picking up black paint. We're going to start making the trees on the sides of the canvas, the ones closest to us, and they're just going to be pure black. But I am, as I press my brush to the canvas, I'm kind of wiggling it side to side a little, twisting it so that the tree has a little bit of movement to it, so it's not this, you know, perfectly straight rail. But I do want to make sure the edges are crisp and that the tree is fully filled in. And it doesn't go all the way to the bottom. It's about 1.5 inches or so from the bottom. Just kind of adding some dark scribbles to the bottom there for the darker grasses. There was just a little bit of black paint left on my brush. I'm going to do another tree here, but I'm going to angle it ever so slightly so that it meets this first tree at the base. And we'll do one over here as well. Same way, I'm kind of pushing my brush flat, but twisting it a little bit side to side to give my tree a bit of a natural edge. Scumble out the bottom with the remnants of the black paint on this side, just like I did on the other side. Kind of helps to frame the tree in the middle a bit, I feel. Gave it a little bit of a branch there on the side and decided that this one over here needed a bit of a branch too. To my 1/2 inch angle, I'm going to get some black and a little bit of white. And I'm going to add some really subtle highlights to these trees as well. But I'm not going to do a whole lot. So I'm just lightly running it down the edge of the tree, kind of twisting the brush a little as I go so that it, again, gives it that natural edge. Doesn't just create a gray stripe down the tree. This tree on the far right is going to have very little highlight compared to the other two. A little more black, a little bit more white, just for a slightly brighter suggestion of highlight in a couple of places. Just get a little bit of black if your highlight gets too crazy. All right, we're going to do the same thing on this second tree, but I'm going to add just ever so slightly more highlights to it. A little bit of a brighter white, just kind of dashing and smearing it on in a few places. And again, I'm just scumbling a hint of that gray color at the base of the trees here. It's dark, but we don't need it to be flat and dead black. Now, this tree is going to have more highlights than either of those two, but it's still less than the main tree, the red tree. That one has the most highlights on the trunk. I like to find interesting shapes in my trees, you know, whether it's the way a branch connects to the trunk, or a knot in the tree, or just an interesting texture to the bark. I like to find those things rather than just, like I said before, run a gray stripe down one side. So look for those little things. Let your brush marks start to suggest features of the tree and then run with those. And scumble out a little bit of that gray color into the base of this tree. Back to the fan brush, and that dark, dark, dark gray. It's almost black. Just working on that texture again. A little bit of white to get a lighter gray. Stab that brush, get some texture. And that's really all I'm doing here, is just playing with the different colors back and forth, adding interesting shapes and textures and colors to the grasses. Just a couple suggestions of some white in here. Maybe these are some flowers that are growing at the base of the tree. And some little grasses. Clean fan brush, just picking up white, stabbing it into my brush, and I really want to brighten up this area. Some little grassy bits and flowers and things like that. So again, it's a combination of the little stabs and the swipes from the bottom up. Back to my 1/4 inch angle and just pure white, and I'm just going to touch up the brightest highlights on my tree, and then I'm going to be done with it. Back to my palette knife and just a little bit of black. Just a slight smear. I just wanted to touch that up at the bottom. See, you really can go back and forth on the ground here as many times as you need to. Just don't overwork anything. You know, if something feels like it's getting away from you, just stop. Let it dry, because it's not going to take much to cover it up or fix it. There's no reason to keep trying to fix it as you're painting it. Now I'm back to my long liner and a little extra water, just using black paint. And I'm going to make some little twiggy bit branches coming down from the top here. Notice how far back I'm holding my brush, and I'm kind of bouncing it and letting it really go wild and make these gnarly looking little branches. Do as many as you like. Then you can kind of poke with the tip of the brush. See, and it makes some little bits that look like old dried leaves that are still hanging onto the branch. Or maybe they're not old dried leaves, maybe they're new fresh leaves, but it's in silhouette, so they just appear black to us. But I'm going to do the same thing on this tree now. And you can let those branches cross in front of your red tree, that's absolutely okay. And the little stabby leaves on this branch as well. And that's really all there is to it. I hope that you enjoyed painting this crimson forest with me and learning a new technique to do foliage with a palette knife. I hope that that was exciting for you. If you'd like to share your version of this painting with me, make sure that you find me on Facebook or Instagram. Just search for Painting with Jane and you'll find me. I would like to say thank you so much to my awesome sponsor Fredericks, who provided the canvas that I used for you in today's video. These canvases really are the absolute best. And I would also like to say thank you to all of you who come and paint with me every single week. It means the world to me, and I hope to see you next time.